represent an unusual international organization in that it...
That were mentioned. But above all, the idea that we are in an era of new multilateralism now. The old multilateralism was an option. The new one is an imperative. Because all your solutions are collective. All your approaches have to be collective as well. And I think it is the role of the G20 to be more like the T20 or the Trustees 20, which collects the views which are applicable, which will be seen globally as responding to the anxiety which is in their minds as well.
Okay. Lord Malik Brown, Britain's hosting this meeting.
Forum and the IMF into, places whether
it was national or international. I think this is a nationally generated crisis with international repercussions. And most countries that have very well and sound financial systems are suffering from the consequence. So these questions that are being discussed may be between experts of rich countries, but they are of interest to everybody else. And then I think I think the G20, if you allow me, because...
It's better for the G20 in London not to have any declaration at all.
These informal systems will get this balance.
Certainly help.
I was going to say to Jerry's point, I think the most dangerous idea still alive out there is that the world is going to somehow expect the American consumer to once more ride to the rescue and save the world economy by borrowing and spending. And that, if that idea is left out there and not addressed by the rest of the world, it is undoubtedly going to lead to protectionism in America. That's because why absolutely shouldn't it? And in that sense, I think part of the message, I think there is a real window to get it done. An issue which has not been raised here, of course, is climate change.
And then try to say, well, the World Bank needs to work with the UN, FFFF. And that brings you right back to the trade argument. In a sense, what will really drag us down is the idea that each country can sort of build its wall, tighten it back down. The more you see that growth in one country will help in another country, the more you keep markets open, that's the only way you're going to get out of this mess. And so in that sense, coming back to the whole concept of multilateralism, the G20 can't do it all, but it can try to give a boost to the WTO process. It can try to give additional resources to the IMF. It can try to give some support to some of the things we're doing in the World Bank. And so I tend to see this as a networked model as opposed to a hierarchical model. And in that sense, the G20 can play a catalytic role, but as everybody else has said here, those countries don't control it by themselves.
Yeah, the lady over there.
The way forward, a path forward for us as global citizens.
In India. But I would agree. Many of the aspects depend on finance, especially if you take very small African countries or very small countries in the Pacific. How can they take obligations if they don't have the financial means to deal with them?
Yeah,
but if you're talking about how to make...
knocked off down by it, and we need to, if it's, look, I think it's a really important deal to get done, but it's very easy to see how we might end the year having, made some significant step forward in economic governance, but having failed on, if you like, on environmental governance, just because of the nature of the economic crisis we're in. But, frankly, this issue of imbalance,
well, I think a lot has to come.
Really be that much. They're a fraction compared to what we've...
Commenting, although we agree on most things here, but why did God write down that the Director General, the Chairman of the World Bank has to be an American and the Chairman of the IMF has to be an European? I don't think it's in the Bible, in the Quran, or in any other...
Is it in the Bible? I don't know. But presumably you can be quite relaxed on this point.
Both have actually said so that they need to have an open, merit, transparent process. I will say, and from international institutions, I haven't seen too many Americans ever get the WTO Director Generalship, the UN Secretary General. So the reality is, if one's going to reform the multilateral system, and we want fairness and equity all across the board.
Totally in favor of that. During Security Council reform, by the way, before taking some actions. I think I'm speaking very honestly here.
The other historical miracle, I would say, is the three Baltic...
over the last 2 decades in order to explain the present.
It is NATO, quite clear. But the only question we have to solve is a cooperative relations with Russia. I think it's possible. I can't imagine why it shouldn't be possible in the long term that Russia could be invited to join NATO. Why not? Why not? If they want. I don't think it will be in foreign relations. I would like to get the problems in fighting against terrorist threats.
Different information on many issues. Having the direct border, Latvia feels safe, secure, with no local tensions in between the ethnic groups, because we are in the European Union and because we are in NATO. And this is the best evidence that we are on the right track, and that's a solution maybe for the other regions too. Okay, not only one day, in a very NATO has proved for 60 years that's really, as even Lavrov said, it's...
In the 18th of March in 1990.
That goes to my fundamental point, that the thing that has not been sorted out is Russia's relationships to its immediate neighbors and the choices that they, out of their democratic will, have made. And that in itself creates problems in the overall relationships. But fundamentally, managing Iran or the Middle East or whatever it is, non-proliferation and terrorism, then Russia is a partner. But this is the unresolved issue of European stability that we still have, they have fundamentally to deal with for their own stable future.
Mm-hmm. Mr. President, you want to say?
Yes, and one more.
It was this woman here. Sorry.
Any individual person to take the decision he doesn't want to take himself.
The Russians are paranoid. And the fact is that I know our president's now talking about rebooting and a new engagement with them. And I have to believe that at this stage of the game that we ought to re-engage with them to try and determine where we have a symbiotic relation with them, i.e. are there goals that they would like to achieve, and by working with us we can accomplish. Now we may find some areas where we disagree, but at least we'll define what the relationship is. And I think also that with the world economy as it is today, the worst thing we could do is break off communication. I think we need more communication today than ever before if we're going to be successful.
Carl.
We will. Senator McCain. Forgot your knife. Thank you, President. Thank you all.
Make no mistake, we can and must win the war in Afghanistan, but we will fail without a new strategy and the increased resources necessary to carry it out. The situation on the ground has reached stalemate at best, and most important indicators, from the reach of the insurgency to violence against civilians to corruption and the narcotics trade, are pointing in the wrong direction. With a new American administration and new resolve on both sides of the Atlantic, the 60th anniversary NATO summit next month offers the allies an opportunity to recommit in Afghanistan. We must seize that chance. If we do not, we risk the reversion of that country to a terrorist safe haven, a terrible setback in global war against the jihadist movement, and a historic defeat. I repeat, an historic defeat for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Success, which is Afghanistan, but we will fail without a new strategy or the narrowly construed interests of individual nations. By the same token, we must level with our citizens about just how difficult this journey to that day will be and potentially how far off. While we must be confident that we can prevail in Afghanistan, we must also know that the going will be exceedingly hard, that the violence will likely get worse before it gets better, that the scale of resources required will be enormous, and that the timetable will be measured in years, not months. It is important to speak frankly of these matters. If we do not, we face a collapse of public support for these vital efforts sooner rather than later. Our words also resonate in the very... See only if we talk to them from the position of strength and with a clear and strong stand on human rights. Before 2007 in Iraq, American special forces had complete